right, man. Welcome to episode 33 to Crrow777 radio podcast. Of course, using the corrupted number system in the corrupted construct in which we live that so many of us have become aware of. I'm seeing a lot of divisiveness on TV programs and in other places where the social programming that comes to us through media, even advertising for that matter, is pushing this divisive idea. I occasionally record some of the most popular shows just to see the intro, and I notice that by the intro of a show, I can instantly pick out the social engineering that's going to go on in most cases. Family Guy, I think the last episode of Family Guy opened up with Peter having broken into someone's house and saying the cops are on the way, but I don't give a damn about him. And while it just seems like comic cartoon shenanigans, it's really something more, because this idea of disrespect to your fellow man and fellow woman in this world is being just wholesale perpetrated. We see in the media the race card being just ramped up and thrown out in our faces every day. The gender idea of men and women not being able to get along and being at odds, constantly thrown in our face. This is on the tail of the election, and the election, of course, was much of the social engineering that came out of the election was this divisive idea where they were going to not only see how ridiculous a thing they could put in front of people, but also push the idea of man versus women, black versus white, any way they could possibly figure out to get more divisiveness into society. And we see this everywhere right now. My guest today is Dave J. He's been off the grid, and I'll tell you what, man, every time I talk with this man, he seems a little more centered, having walked away from YouTube and the madness that YouTube can become. Matter of fact, most of the online social media tools can become. I don't remember how long it was. Way back when I first saw Dave J's channel, there was a wholesale just brawl going on over there all the time. Which, I mean, when you're one of the early people trying to point out the system that is becoming more evident every day, a little bit of this is going to go on. But I'll tell you what, you can almost recognize at what level a person is by watching how they communicate online. When you see the fighting and the back and forth and the just nonsense, it's very evident that the two people involved in that conversation have not really quite made it up through the threshold of the next step. I always liken it to if someone came up to you and wanted to argue about the color of the sky. Would you argue with them? We all know the sky is blue. It is what it is. It's self-evident. But yet if someone wanted to come argue with you about that, would you even bother? And I think that's a fair example of what we see going on, where so many are coming to recognize the system. Actually, there's a lot of people out there trying to put stumbling blocks down as well to prevent people from accurately seeing the system. But if you get to a point where you understand certain things, and by the way, you're going to hear it over and over and over in this episode, do not accept what's being said. Go out, challenge it, test it. If you do that, then you know. And it's like the sky being blue. This is not a thing you will need to argue about anymore. It's completely irrelevant whether the person in front of you or the group of people around you understand, because you now know. You have tested it. You understand. That is the power of knowing. But in this episode, we cover so much, and all the things that I began to become aware of about our corrupted construct of a system. I don't even remember how long ago it was, actually, now. I mean, it just kind of happened over time. But I think about it much differently than Dave J does. Dave J almost lays down a mechanical schematic way of thinking about this. And I recognize this from the earliest videos that I saw from Dave J. And while we don't share the same religious beliefs, it matters not, because we have both determined these very same ideas expressed in very different ways are in fact the same thing. It's almost like trying to make it to this city called reality, and there are all these roads coming in. One is windy, one is straight, one is an overpass, one comes through a tunnel. All these different ways to get there, but two people coming together and understanding they have recognized beyond doubt to the point of knowing, like I know the sky is blue, that we are talking about the same thing, that we have recognized similar things about this system and construct. And there are some very critically important truths covered in this episode. Again, the Skype method that I used to record gave us some trouble. I had to send the audio files off to Jason Lindgren, who's an audio engineer, but he did a pretty good job getting them to where they're at. They could be a little bit better, but they are quite listenable. So I hope people will take the time to truly consider what's going on in this episode. And again, don't swallow this. Don't believe this. Don't let anything that's said here change your worldview. Test it. Challenge it. Take it into your own possession and do what you need to do to try to knock it down. Try to rip it apart. Try to authenticate it. If you do these things, there will be value there at some level. Maybe that level's different for each person depending on where they are in the scheme of things. But this is what, I mean, Dave points it out a few times in this episode. Every word out of our mouth should be subject to this, and yet it's not. I'm just as guilty as anyone else. I know that every word should be subject to this, but I have built a lifetime, and habits die hard. Not too long ago, I was talking about maybe rethinking using the word kid because that's a young goat. And here in this episode, it slips out of my mouth again. This is exactly what I'm talking about. It is a process. But there is no portion of this system that we live in that should not be challenged and examined and just acid tested to boil it down to what's there, to understand and know that portion of the system for what it is. Anyhow, this is episode 33. I hope you guys will jump over to Crrow777radio.com for the second hour. It's every bit as packed with information. Anyhow, let's jump in. All right, man. Welcome to Crrow777 Radio, episode 33. And I have with me Dave J., who appears to be back on the grid for a short time at least. How are you, Dave?
I'm doing really well. How about yourself?
Hey, man, I'm doing good. How long's it been? It's been a number of months since we've talked anyhow.
Absolutely, yeah. A little over half a year, I guess.
Yeah, something like that. I think it was middle of summer, maybe?
Right.
Anyhow, you've been living off the grid still all this time. You've been away from all the online madness, haven't you?
Yes, I have. And then getting back, I've just noticed the snail's pace. I even hate to use the word, but the evolution of thought on YouTube and even across the internet seems to be at a snail's pace. Yeah,
there's a lot of kind of pre-programmed attitude being inserted into all the conversations. You know,
right?
People leading people astray, people fighting, people saying, "I know this, but you don't know that." Just the typical. You know, right. Drag your feet through the mud, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. It's a lack of going out and doing the work for themselves, meaning instead of looking for the teacher, you know, going out and teaching through experiment, through failure, through retest, that idea.
Yeah, it's a heck of a thing. You know, I say it over and over, Dave. There comes a point in the life of a human being, or at least there is the potential for that point to come in the life of a human being, where you start to use your higher mind, where you grow up a little bit, and you can just detect nonsense. Now, this doesn't tell you necessarily why things are nonsense or all the things a human being would like to know about a given event, but it does tell you that it's nonsense. In the same way, when you hear a child lie, you know you've been lied to, and you can't really put your finger on it, but nonetheless, you know it's nonsense. And what we see in the online community at large, in my view, is just simple belief. They are so wrapped up in the belief of all the things they've been told their whole life.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's one of those things. I've told people this before whenever they've asked me, is that I don't go out of my way, but if they ask me, I say it's best to start with taking everything you thought you knew, just get rid of it completely, because it's not going to do you any harm to start from nothing. You're still going to get up, you're still going to breathe, you're still going to eat and do all that stuff, but your mind's going to be clear. And then go through each day and prove every word that you hear, and in fact, every word that you speak. Prove that before you then continue to say it or even start to believe it. Prove it first. Every word, every syllable needs to be proven before it's to be believed.
That's such a true thing. I mean, I've said it for quite some time that when you understand some of the major falsehoods that have been put in front of us, and we always use the same old tired ones like Sandy Hook, but when you understand that a falsehood has been pawned off on the world at large at that level, you would think that the average human being would then shift their mindset to say anything I hear from here on in is false right out of the gate unless it can be proved to be valuable. I mean, isn't that a reasonable way to go at things?
Yeah, like I said, it's just a re-saying of what I was saying.
That's right.
The same thing is to prove all words, prove all thoughts, prove all deeds.
That's truer words were never spoken. But anyhow, we are on episode 33, and I did give it some thought about what I would run, and I'm sure we'll get the jokers who can add and subtract and come in and scream Illuminati from the top of their lungs. But setting that nonsense aside, you want to talk a little bit about numbers, maybe?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, at 33, take that just right off the get-go. I mean, you can do all the simple stuff by adding it and coming up with 6 and saying that's the cube, and then the cube is 6 sides with 8, with the 8 corners idea. So the 68 idea, or the system with the 7 in between. And what's interesting about that 7 is I wanted to speak to you this before. If you take the 4 sevens, which is you would need 4 of those to hold this cube, create a basic structure. That then, if you take 4 sevens and turn them, that's where you get your sun sign or your swastika, that idea. But then I wanted to go even farther and say your 33 is really just another way of looking at your visual spectrum of violet, blue, green, yellow, orange, red. So you have your 6 colors. Half of that is 3, and then the other half would be 3, or the idea of 33. And then another thing, and I find this interesting, is then when you go into lately where people bring in the color of indigo, which is nothing more than purple, which is why you see a lot of purple ties and purple lights and all that through entertainment, through news, even through music, you're going to see a lot of this purple or indigo. That then brings the idea of the 33 or the 6 system into what's another digit up, or the 7. Or the Zion, or the mind. So it's an idea of changing minds. That's changing minds through news stories, changing minds through books, word of mouth, changing minds through music and newscasts, the same thing. So what you're doing is you're putting out stories, and you're putting out what is in other terms, a wavelength. You're putting out a new wavelength, or a new color, a new idea, a new way to look at things. Unfortunately, that new way of looking at things is from the fallen system, or the idea of deception.
That's interesting as hell. And well, I want to address 2 things here, but while you're on the purple, and clearly we see a crossover to royalty in that purple, and also death, do we not?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you think about the idea of the bruise, the bruise, it goes kind of from the blue light into the indigo, or into the purple. So you kind of see a blue bruise, and then you see an indigo. You see it purpling as it kind of spreads underneath the skin. Even if you look at your veins through your skin, they're going to look blue. So then if you slap yourself, or you hurt yourself for some reason, then that bruise becomes purple or indigo. That idea. And what's also interesting about that idea of 6 into 7, or taking the idea of 6, the violet, blue, green, yellow, orange, red, and then adding in that 7th idea or color, it also becomes what a lot of people know as redshift. People who do
astronomy,
or astronomy would know that term, but the term is a bit misunderstood in that all you're doing is you're shifting, or you're identifying with a different wavelength.
So So wait a minute. Let me drill at that for a second, Dave. So in astronomy, the idea of redshift is if you're looking at something and you can show that the spectrum you're observing is shifting red, the claim astronomy makes is that thing is getting further away from you because red is the longest light wave. But what you're saying is something a little bit different, is it not?
Right. Well, yeah, it is. It's because it's actually shifting. It's shifting your center point is what I'm saying. So your center point, your red is your longer wavelength, and of course your violet would be your shorter wavelength.
Right.
And of course, past that, moving into X-rays and then gamma rays. And then, but anyways, what that does is it then shifts your center point, and then, where people might hear the term off kilter, or off center, or off balance. You understand? So then the balance then becomes 4 colors to 3 colors instead of 3 to 3. So you have the idea, what I was going to get into is the idea of 6 into 7, or what's called Ramsey's theorem. Now, Ramsey's theorem goes into the idea, if you take your fingers, make 2 sevens, like the gun fingers, and put them together and make a triangle, like you see a lot of these folks do on these pictures. Now, if you put the point where your pointer fingers are and hold it to a mirror, you're going to see that the reflection then creates the idea of an hourglass. Well, that center point is the 6 to 7 idea. It means that it's going from what you can visually see into the invisible. All right. So then, speaking of like colors, you would be going into the visual spectrum. Let's say if your visual spectrum is 390 nanometers to 780, which is your standard length, but the visible being 400 to 700, there's 90 nanometers that are unaccounted for, which would be 10 on the top end and the 80 on the bottom end. That dark area or dark light is what I go into when I talk to you about my CERN stuff. My CERN work is exploring that dark area of visible light that is still considered visible light, but is not perceived by the human eye. Yet it's still within the visible light spectrum. So then that dark, go ahead. So
wait a minute. So what you're saying then? Well, maybe you're not saying this. Would we consider that NIR or NUV? I mean, would it be near infrared and near ultraviolet, or is it something else? You're calling it visual, which kind of implies that it's not those things, but to be outside of what we can see, it implies that it is those things.
Well, yeah. The 10 nanometers prior to what's known as ultraviolet light would be included, in the 80 nanometers just prior to infrared is what I'm including in that.
I see. And so
then that. Go ahead.
Well, what I was going to ask is, so people can visualize this. Give us the colors on either side of the spectrum. So at one side, it would be like reds.
Okay, so starting from, let's say, 700 nanometers or the longer wavelength, you have red, orange, yellow. Now you're right into the middle. And now you go from yellow to green, blue, violet. The only difference is that if you go to the 7 scale, you would add indigo in between violet and blue.
Which is visual but not perceptibly visual?
No, all that's visible. Where I'm talking about is what would be considered dark light, which would be above violet and below red, if that's what you want to talk about. But then you're looking at, a nanometer is a billionth, right, of a meter. So you're looking at huge numbers in an area that you couldn't even put in, if it was in your hand, you couldn't see it. Does that make any sense? So when people look up at or they look at science and they're giving them these ideas of distance and space, which are all made up because they're just you're dealing with nothing more than a domed sky on a flat plane of Earth. But they give you these huge numbers so that your mind says, well, I can't deal with that right now. There's these so-called experts that they put on. I'll just listen to what that guy says because he took the time to get trained and go to school to understand it.
Right.
But what I'm saying is that the numbers are just as big, but they can fit in the palm of your hand. Because it's a different understanding. You're taking a meter and then breaking it up into parts, which then become wavelength.
So in this part of the kind of dark visual spectrum you're talking about, is there a way to assign color to that, or is it just like an aberration of the last color that was visually detectable?
Well, I think that the best way to go that is it becomes better known as shades of gray at that point, because it's going to be, dark light or what's called black, which is absence of light. But being that there is actually some detectable light there, to the observer, it's going to be a shade of gray, because there's not enough there for it to be within the visual spectrum. So then I would rather just call it a shade of gray. And then you'll see a lot of cultural references to the shades of gray.
Yep.
And then within that area, and this is what I went into when I did my CERN work, is that if you're looking for an idea, okay, or a concept, it's going to fall within a wavelength, because words and deeds create ideas, or I guess ideas can be conveyed in words and deeds is a better way to say it. But then those words and deeds are then taken by somebody, and then they are consumed. They're believed. Okay, so then you have the idea of the one being the idea, the two being the concern. You're going to ask yourself, why do I care about that? Right? Or should I care about that? And if your answer is yes, then you go into the idea of the three, or the ring, or the idea of eating or consuming that idea, and then having it being a part of your person, your soul. That three then is reflected in the mirror, because you are putting that idea out to the world to see. So then that becomes another reflection of the idea of 33. Do you understand?
Yeah,
because
man.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dave. It's interesting
okay.
as hell, man.
No, yeah. So I was just saying, so then all these ideas that people believe in, and they get schooled into it, quite literally by schooling, just like fish, you get schooled into it, and then you reflect that idea out to the outside world, even to yourself, because you're a reflection of what you believe. So people discuss things with themselves. It's called the internal dialogue. So then that is that idea of 33. That is the idea of the cube, or what would be the box people put themselves in, right? Do you understand? So if you believe something is this way and this way, and you won't accept anything else, you have now allowed yourself to be boxed in to an idea.
Right, man. It's just so interesting. And I think you and I both agree that this is a broken, corrupted system. Do we agree on that?
Oh, absolutely.
I know we've talked before about, I had a point of view about the use of 9/11 being an endless broken loop, but now that you're talking about 33, I'll jump back to that in a second.
Okay, I'd like to talk about 9/11 just as you brought it up real quick, though.
Okay,
just in
go
the
ahead.
same, okay, so what's very interesting about this is numbers mean things, just like words mean things, because it's all tone and it's all pattern. But if you take the 390 to 780 nanometer scale, and then that's your visual light scale, but then there's also what's called the scale which people can actually perceive, and that would be 400 to 700. Now, if I take those two scales, let's take 390 to 780 and just add those numbers up. So 39 would be your 12 or into your 3. The 78 is going to be your 15 or making into your 6. The 6 plus 3 is your 9. That's your 369 system that people talk about. If you understand the 369, you understand everything. You probably heard that idea from, the character of Tesla.
Right. It was. Yep.
Okay. So then so let's continue this. So then you have the idea of the spectrum where you can actually perceive it, and that would be 400 to 700. So let's take your 4 and your 7. That makes your 11. So then that is your 9/11 system. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
That's interesting, man.
Yeah.
Anyhow, let me. I almost want to keep going on that, and I'll get back to that in a second. So to take to 33, I was considering as I was coming up on episode 33, I started thinking about all the things that we could talk about, and you came right out of the gate, talking about 33. But in a way, isn't 33 just another example of a broken, corrupted system, in that anything that's a whole, we call it 100%. But 33 can never divide evenly 100%. We can half it, we can quarter it, we can do all these things to get even subdivisions. But 33, this key thing, the idea of 3, you can never get there. If you have a whole and you have a third, you're always going to have a remainder, so it's never clean.
Okay, so then let me jump on that real quick and just take the idea of the 3 6s, or the idea of 36. Okay.
Yep.
And then so you take 4 times 9. All right. So then you're gonna come up with 36, right?
Yep.
So then if I take my 4 9s, all right, let's think about this in a graphical display. I'm going to take 4 of my 90 degrees, right? All right. So then go ahead and times your 90 times 4. You're going to get 360. Right, that's going to be the first full circle, correct? Like a cycle.
Right.
That then can be also described as looking at the clock phase, as going to be the idea of 24 hours in a day, right?
Yep.
All right. Take your 4 plus your 2, that adds into 6, and then what do you get when you cut 6 in half? You get your idea of 33. All right. So then there is a balance there, and it's 33 is just describing a cycle or a circle.
That's interesting, because you went backwards to get there, but you came from a place of an even division.
Right.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. You know, it's funny. And by the way, just so people understand, the number 36 quite often in the common vernacular is recognized to equate to 666, because if you add every number from 1 to 36, it adds up to 666, just so people understand.
And you also notice that your 360 degrees includes your 3/6, right?
Right.
And then, and you're not. But it's also interesting that when I talked to you about the 7s before, the 4 7s making the idea of the swastika, or the idea of, think about this as well. It also makes your idea of the 33. Because remember, I told you make the pyramid sign with your finger and hold that to the mirror.
Yeah.
So you're going to sit your pyramid sign. Let's just take it to the idea of the dinner bell. It's nothing but, it's called like the dinner bell, ring, 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 to eat. So then if you take that idea, so 4 7s, because that's 1 7 2 7s creates your triangle, 3 7 4 7s creates your hourglass idea. 4 times 7, of course, is going to be your 28. 8 plus 2 is going to be your 10, or your cycle, because when I reduce the numbers, and this is the numbers that this system that we're into uses. You use the numbers 1 through 9, and then 10 is, of course, the return, which loops back to the 1, which makes the idea of the 101. But to get back to that, you have the idea of the sphere of influence. It's called the SOI, or sphere of influence. Now, if you take the S and you hold that and you reflect it against itself, you come up with it's visually representative of the number 8, or the idea of a closed loop, or an idea of a snake eating its tail, kind of around and around and around it goes.
Yep.
But then you also have the idea of the OI, which is going to be the IO, or going to be recognized as the 10, which is going to be the idea of the return, the idea of the sun. The idea of the sun returning at the end of each cycle to do it all over again. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So then you always have to take, and this system is a reflection system. This whole system that we live in is a reflection of what you believe to be true. And the problem is that most people, in fact, the majority of the people, believe the nonsense that's put out, because it's not only put out into news, but movies and novels then reinforce these ideas of the hoaxes, especially these big ones. Let's say like the controlled demolition of the Twin Towers, where nobody died, nobody got hurt. That idea. That goes back to the 9/11 idea we already talked about, which is just a combination of the visual spectrum, including that 90 nanometers I talked about, that is within that spectrum, but is not perceivable, to the naked eye idea, but it's still in fact there. But then that then goes into the idea of the twins, or into the two. So then you're looking at a reflection of the other, which is why it's always important to put everything to the idea of the reflection. And that goes into the whole Masonic idea, too, of a reflection of the world, or building a world, or building. And when I say world, I mean the world on which people believe on, not the dirt, not the actual earth. That does its own thing, but the world is what people believe is happening, what drives and what motivates them, what they what they look at is what they can empathize with, that idea. So you look at the square and the compass, and a lot of people always put that up and they say, look, there's a square and a compass, and the guys, well, okay, what does that mean then? So then you take then shapes and ideas and what can be drawn from, what can you draw from that? And the biggest idea is what's used as the Star of David idea, or what's called the hexagram, or in Latin, the sexagram. It's interesting that it's sexagram, being that you have all these sex, drugs, and rock and roll idea, and the sex ideas driving humanity, basically.
Right, so much of it.
And so then, well, it's how we all got here at the end of the day, right? So then also you have the idea that the hex being nothing more than taking that same pyramid I told you, that 3, tilting it on its side, at 45 degrees, which is going to be your 9, and then adding a second one right on top of it. That creates your hexagram. So that, again, is a reflection of the 33 idea. But then, of course, you include then within that space, or how did it get into that position, you have the idea of the 2 9s, okay? Which makes it, adding those together, you get your 3rd. All right. So then also that idea is also then in the reflection, the 9 in the reflection gives you your idea of Cancer, or your 69, which is why that shape is represented, or it goes to the idea of Saturn worship at the end of the day, being that is known by the symbol of Cancer, that idea.
So I would say to the average listener, Dave just hit so many foundationally critical things for the person who's a little ways down the road, starting out, trying to find a path. To listen to the last 3 or 4 minutes of some of the things he just covered are so critical, with the idea of belief, the idea of mirroring, which, I mean, that could also play into as above, so below, I would imagine, right?
It's the same way. It's a different way of saying the same thing.
Right. But I wanted to touch on I wanted to reiterate that conversation we had on 9/11. I don't know, It's been years ago now, where we were discussing what you just pointed out, where we live in a system, an artificial system, that uses the numerical characters 1 through 9. When you get to 10, that rolls you back. So 10's like a completion in a cycle, and 0 and 1 add to 1, so it throws you back to the beginning of a new cycle. And I had, a long, long time ago, considered that the 9/11 idea was a bit like throwing you in an endless broken loop, where a normal cycle would be, even though it's not really normal because it's still a corrupted system, but it's a complete cycle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But the 9/11 idea starts at 1, gets to 9, jumps to 11. 1 and 1 is 2, so it doesn't throw you back to 1, it throws you back to 2. So after, in a post-9/11 world, the broken endless echo is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, right?
Right. And what's interesting about you bringing up the 2 is I identify of course, remember the 1 is the idea. You have to bring something into being, the word. The 2 is the concern. So then it brings you back into concern for, whatever that is. And the problem is the concern that you're showing is for something that was hoaxed, that was set up, that was then was planned, and then they're taking your concern, which is very powerful, because you only have so much time in your life, to put to things. Every minute, every second that you give to something that's not true, or at least that you don't understand the foundation of, is wasted time. So then I wanted to talk to you about that same idea, and how that 9/11 idea leads into the idea of what's called the black swan. And the idea of, if you look at the idea of black swan, that's represented by the 7 into 8, or into the corners. The idea of the 7, which is 7 is the idea of the Zion, or the mental aspect of any one of these hoaxes. But the 8 is the corners that control or that surrounds you. The 8, of course, brings you back into the system, like you were just saying, back into the double 8 or the HH idea, right? Do you understand? So you have your 2 that you were talking about. Let's apply that to the idea of the 88 or the HH, and then if you take that, the black swan idea, which is that same idea. The black swan is the idea that, or it's known as something that in retrospect you look at and you said, I should have known that was going to happen. So then after, let's say, the 9/11 hoax, people started bringing out all the Simpsons stuff and all this other stuff that says, look at all this stuff that was showing that they were going to do this. So then in retrospect, in hindsight, the idea of 2020 or your 2-2, of course, making your mirrored 2 in the mirror, making your 4, okay, yeah. Or door. That door, that Dalet, then allows you to then look back and say, okay, oh shoot, in retrospect, we should have known that, and then you spend all this time looking at something you already have figured out or you should have known. So then what that tells you is that if that's the truth, and it is, then you can take a look at what's going on now. And see what's being put out now, and then mirror that within what you know, and then you can what would be best is to tell the future idea, or at least to come up with possibilities of what they might do in the future. And I mean those who are in league, and I'm going to say this in a way that I hope it doesn't offend people, but in league with an evil that is best described as a tone. And that tone is a corrupted tone. It's a corrupted light. It's a corrupted idea. And the way that power works, and it's all power, the way that power works is to prey upon the innocence of human beings, because the human mind is quite childish, being that it will believe anything given the proper structure, meaning that if I give you a good story and I give you enough details, that's where the devil's in the details comes from. If I give you enough details that supports that structure within your mind, it will stay aloft until something comes by and just breaks it. It's like people believe something until something comes into their mind that just shatters what they used to believe. And what the problem is most people have built up such a superstructure in the mind, and this is through the idea of the Masonic idea of building a world around a certain idea. So you have these lies that you believe, and each one is built upon the other, and it's built upon a false foundation. So that's, of course, going back to what we started at the beginning, meaning that you have to knock that foundation out completely, dislodge all of that, get rid of everything, and start completely over from the beginning.
Which to me, Dave, there's a very critical thing in what you're saying here, because while you're pointing out that there's this just dark force preying on people, to use your own words again, it also points out that every individual listening to this has the power to no longer feed that beast.
Absolutely.
And without belief, without buying into lies and falsehood, changing your point of view, where everything you see that's constructed is likely a lie. If you view the world in this way until it proves itself, you're kind of taking the battery away from the machine that needs the energy, are you not?
Well, yeah, you are. Of course, being that people are the battery that keeps us going, and that's, I think, the point you were trying to make. I'll only point this out, and this is just for me personally, because this isn't a group effort, as most people think that we're all in it together. Actually, you're not. Everyone has to figure this out themselves. They have to have their own revelation. They have to have their own apocalypse. And the apocalypse is when everything within your mind gets destroyed, and you start over, and you have to start from the foundation. Now, here's where I'm going to say where my foundation is, and people can take it or leave it, and then I'll move on. When I collapsed the system within my mind, when I knew it was all a hoax, and I didn't know where to start, I turned to Jesus Christ, and that is the foundation which I built what I'm telling you upon, and that's who gave me this foundation. Now, that aside, people are welcome to then take their time and go through their life and decide what their best course of action is. I'm saying that is the course I took, and that's just so that people say, well, where are you getting this from, and how do you know this? That's where I know it from. That's where I got it from. So just so that people know the foundation stone that I'm working from, so they can decide if the structure that I'm putting into practice is something that they want to look at, or if something they want to dismiss. That's up to them.
These are critical points, Dave. And while you and I don't share the same religious beliefs, we absolutely share the same experience. And when I heard you describe it just now as collapsing everything down, I had tried to describe it in like old blogs that I had written as basically throwing out everything you've ever been taught, all the way to the point where 1 + 1 no longer equals 2. You have to start all over again. You have to reason out, does 1 + 1 really equal 2? And it seems kind of trite to a lot of people, but right. I come from a slightly different angle, but everything you said is the only possibility people have to get out from under this deception, and well, to
yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say just that words, of course, have value, and words have a certain power as well. So certain words are loaded. As soon as somebody says a word, people react a certain way. So especially like religious or that idea.
Right.
I do all what I'm doing. I don't go to church. I don't associate with anybody who really does, to be quite honest, because I'm not I don't.
You don't follow groups.
No, I don't. And because, at some point when you follow a group, you have to be in tune with them all the time, or you become at some point left outside the discussion. So that's why it's best that I go with the spirit of truth, that idea, so that when I get something, I know that it's true, but I still verify it through tests, through my own observation, through trying to disprove what I'm saying is in fact true. So before I come out and say this is true and this is how this works, I try to break that. I try to go out and through observation, through study, and through actual experiment, I prove or disprove everything that I believe, because that's the most important thing, is that what you believe to be true, you better be able to test, and you better be able to verify. Because otherwise, why do you believe that? Why are you even wasting your time believing that?
Right. Well, right. And it always comes back to, how do you end up believing a thing? Well, it's simply a choice, isn't it? There's no investigation. There's no effort to authenticate what basically much of the belief, as far as I can tell, in this corrupted system is someone is told something, and as you said, words are charged. Something will hit your ear in a way that wants your humanity to grab onto that and say, okay, I want to believe that. There's so many examples, but at the end of the day, that has no value. And if you ever step back to give it the acid test, guess what? The acid's going to burn it all away, and there's going to be nothing left. And that is one of the underlying problems. But I think it's critical that you pointed out that in your belief system, you did it by yourself. And I have said this over and over and over. Every single human being has the ability to use their higher mind, to be an adult, and that does not require a leader. It does not require a group of men or women or a mix of those things or some organization to show you the way. Every single person has the ability to navigate. They just don't realize it. Right.
And I wanted to get into some other stuff that you talked about just before I left it alone, and the idea of how then does somebody become concerned into something and then allow themselves to give their power to something. So, the idea, the one, the two, the concern, and the three, the bell or the ring or what people consume, that idea of that. How then is that three then mirrored to create your idea of 33, or the idea of the box and the cube that people put themselves in? I just thought to myself, if you then go into a market, or you just walk outside and you see somebody, you see them over by the counter, and you observe and you witness a can fall off the counter and hit them on the toe. You see that you have the idea that there was a can that fell off the counter. You have concern because you know that by your own, just through life, that a can falling on your foot, even if you haven't done it, you've done something similar to where you know that that's going to hurt. So then what's the first thing you do? You go over and you ask that person, are you okay? Because you have concern. And then that person says something to you. They're going to ring. They're going to then produce the ring. They're going to say, oh, no, I'm okay. It just bounced off the end of my shoe, which then allows that 3 never to be completed. Right? It doesn't allow you then, and then, or if they say, oh man, it really hurt my nail, right? And you're like, and then you say, oh, concern, is there something I can do? And then that involves you. That then completes the cycle, puts you into the box, right? And that's not good or bad. Concern about things can be good because you're helping somebody. But that same idea and that same innocence of concern can be used against you.
Right. That's what I was going to say, Dave, is what you've just pointed out is one of the most insidious bear traps that every one of us has stepped in our life. What you've pointed out is how easily that kind of construct can be used to draw people in the wrong direction.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And what's so interesting is it goes back into the idea of the bruise, and the idea of if something is hurt, or if somebody is hurt, that your concern goes into that idea. And then what is that color? What is the color that you're concerning yourself over? It's the color of the bruise, or it's the idea of the indigo or the purple, the idea of the bruise. And then what's so interesting about the idea of purple or bruise is that it would be 445 nanometers. The idea of the 13 or the 4, the door, the dalet, the 13 also being the top of the mark. The idea of the 13th sign. The idea of handling the snake.
Yeah,
the snake handler,
Ophiuchus. Yeah.
Okay, so then all of this stuff has so many meanings and so many ways to show the same thing that then you take simple ideas, which I gave you in the idea of the can hitting the toe, but then you create folklore, or you create characters around those simple ideas, and that's where you get all these different cultural contexts, I guess, from whether you're dealing with occultism or Hinduism or any of these isms, where they have different ways of explaining the same truth or the same idea that I just told you.
Right, man, it's so fascinating. So what I want to do here is talk a little bit about the perceived idea of time travel that's thrown at people through movies, through media, the whole Back to the Future thing. And also to mention that anyone who pays attention and has seen these movies where time travel is an aspect, you'll always see the 8 or the 88.
Right.
A lot of years ago, I always used to wonder, why is it the 8 or the 88? I had kind of come to the realization that we're back to the cube, aren't we? The 8 corners of the cube, and of course that goes to Chronos.
Well, you take the idea of the 88 or the HH, you add those together, you get the 16, which makes your 7, which leads you back into the idea of the mind, or the Zion, that mind weapon, which I told you that the center of the cube is the creation of your 4 sevens, 90 degrees apart, or making what's called the sun sign, or the swastika. The idea of the 28, the 10, the cycle idea, the influence, the sphere of influence, the SOI. The sphere of influence is then, if within the sound of my voice, those who can hear me are going to be influenced one way or another. They're going to say, this guy's, a nutcase, therefore they'll dismiss. Or they'll say, oh, this guy has something to say, I'm going to listen to it. And then what happens with both those? The one who says they're a nutcase, they walk off and they continue to do their other thing. If the person then listens to you within that sphere of influence, then they're going to go ahead and take what they learn from you and then put it to the test, hopefully. And if they put it to the test and they find that it has merit, then they will accept it. Not because they were told that, but because that they became aware of it, they tested it, and it was true.
Right.
So then that's the idea of the 88 reduces to the 16, goes into the 7 idea of the mind. And that is that invisible, that is, you can't identify a thought in your head. It's, you can identify the space where your brain is, but your mind is something that it's hard to put a finger on where it is, right? It's you have these huge thoughts sometimes, and they're just without end. But that is the idea of the 7, because it's just giving an identity to something that's hard to identify. So then that is what's called the Zion, or return to Zion idea, or return to the mind. So then if you return to the mind, which is where you need to figure all this stuff out, then what leads you through that process of discovery? It goes back to what I was talking about, where my foundation is. But then people have to decide what foundation stone they're going to set, and then build the ideas in their mind, and which becomes their belief, which becomes the way that they operate in society, outside their door, inside their house, inside, as they're laying down to sleep. That structure they've built is how they're going to live, because everything is going to be a reflection of that, how they act and everything else.
Yeah, man, there's no doubt. Have you ever, well, I'm sure you probably have, let's address the idea of the Ayin, Zion, or the OZ, as it would be pulled from the Hebrew, or Oz. Have you ever thought about this at all?
Oh, well, I mean, I think simply culturally you would go to the Oz, or the idea of the Wizard of Oz.
Naturally.
And so then what, but there's two things there. You say the Wizard of Oz. So then Oz to me is going to be the mind itself, which I was just talking about. So if you then allow the Wizard of Oz to control your thoughts and to control your mind through historical, religious, cultural texts, through news and through music, then that Oz is being controlled by a wizard or a power that you can't touch, you can't see, you can't feel, because you've allowed yourself to become, controlled by a wizard, by magic, I guess is another way to say it, or another way to say that would be just by a power or an idea or a tone. I like to say tone because that goes into the idea of 3 and the idea of the tone or the bell or the ring, because that idea of the 3, which we talked about, which is the control, it only controls you if you mirror it. And then that becomes, again, what we opened up with, which is the 33, right? And then that leads you into, so I understand that people want to make a big complicated issue of all this stuff, but every way you look at it, it all comes back to the center point, which is why even within the mathematics and the idea of showing you the inner workings of a cube or even a hexagram, you're gonna deal with a center point, and then you're gonna deal with rays going out in all directions, and then you will then measure the amount of degrees between each ray, which is going to give you the idea of the shape of a, whatever that shape is, hexagram, whatever that is. But then those numbers, of course, mean things, and those numbers can then be transcribed into colors. Let's say, for example, blue is 475 nanometers, and that then adds to 16 or to your 7. So then blue is the idea of concern we talked about, or at least the beginning of concern. If you then go into the idea of purple, the idea of the 445 nanometers, which is the 13 or what? The 4, that's your door, which allows, so you have the concern, but then do you go into it? You understand? That's where your idea of the 2-4 idea, or going into that cycle, comes from. Violet is also and here's where I see where the indigo was brought into vogue. It's brought in because it's 445 nanometers. I'm sorry, and the violet would be your 400 nanometers, which is the idea of, which is another way of saying the 4 as well, because it's 400 with the 2 knots making the 2. So you can see that as also adding up to your 6 idea, or even if you take the 4 times 2 is the 8 idea. But the indigo, to me, is a much more violent color.
Yes.
The color purple gives you a more violent usage than violet does. So that's why the color purple is used, because it intrinsically tells people, or it's able to convey the idea of pain or damage, that idea.
And it also spans across 44.
Sure does.
You were putting indigo at 45, but when I was doing some of the Prince work, I had gone and sampled some of the images and like his old guitar or whatever.
Right.
So much of it came back to 44, death's doors. The idea of actual death.
Yeah, 44.5. So is what I was saying. So you're right. You're right in the same area I am.
Right, and there was another peculiarity about the purple as I was researching it. So many colors, you just take two colors and put them together. Purple has an aspect where it requires more than just the two elements. But what I was pointing out to people was when we came up through school, your primary colors were taught to you as yellow, blue, and red. But yet here in the digital age, so often the primary colors are portrayed not as yellow, but as green being a primary. And actually green is a secondary because yellow and blue make green, right? So here we are into the digital age where even the primary palette has shifted. And I was pointing out that if you took two crayons with reflective color and you took red and blue, you would get some semblance of purple. If you go into a computer which is not reflective color, which relies on a different primary color palette using green, and you mix blue and red, you get this like weird magenta. So I mean, there's this whole strange aspect of how this is being applied in the digital age even.
Yeah, I have one slight disagreement with that color idea, because if you look, especially if you use paint, the idea of paint, red, green, and blue you can produce by using 25500, depending on red, 25500 on the green and blue. Yellow, of course, using paint, you have to mix the colors, because the idea of red, green, blue is the idea of 267, or the idea of 15 into 6, or the actual cube. Red, green, yellow is 263, or the idea of 11 moving into your 2. And that goes back to the 2 idea that we talked about before, or even to the Twin Towers idea. And of course, that idea is that's the only place I would deviate from what you just said, and that's only because I use paint a lot in constructing diagrams, and in order to produce certain colors, I have to adjust the numbers I use, and for red, green, and blue, I always use 255 and then 0 and 0 respectively.
Digitally or in a real world?
Digitally within Paint.
Well,
Paint, the Microsoft program.
That's kind of what I'm pointing out, though, Dave, because in that color palette, your primaries are green instead of yellow. Right. But in the actual world, we were taught, at least I was taught in my days of grade school, that yellow was the primary. So I'm pointing out the shift, and I can't speak to the validity of any of it. My what I'm talking about is actually from. It wasn't learned in school. It was learned through my own process of experimentation, which is where I'm getting that from. And also, so your idea of green, which is 510 nanometers, and yellow, which is 570. Of course, the middle of that, which is 540, creates your 9 as well. But then your yellow, which is 570, is reduced from 12 to 3, and your green is 510, which reduces to 6. So again, you have your 3, 6, 9. Right.
Now, interestingly enough, real quick, the middle of your so-called Masonic, square and compass, there's the letter G, which of course sits right in the middle of this color spectrum. And if you shift it with the idea of, or the addition of indigo as being your top mark in this removing violet, you're going to go ahead and get that G sign, which is again through the Phoenician is marked with what looks like a 7, or what would be the modern day Roman usage of 7, which is nothing more than the third number in that language, which would have been Phoenician. So the G equals the 3, but also then equals the 7 idea, which goes back to the 3 sevens, or the 21 making your 3 idea. Do you see?
Yeah, that's
It
interesting,
comes around
man.
again.
It's
Yeah.
interesting too, but not only that, we were talking about the primaries.
Right.
I'm not looking at it, but if I remember back correctly, when we're talking about green and yellow, you're almost dead center in the visual spectrum, are you not?
Yeah, you're right there.
Yeah, you're right there. So what I was going to point out is it kind of shows you where there should be an actual center, how it can easily be skewed a little one way or a little the other.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why when I talked to you a while ago about
Right.
being off kilter or off
Right.
center, and that idea of the G is now understood better because the God of, and when I say God, that is the power that people ascribe their life to. Their God is then a God of light, and when I say light, I don't mean light as when Jesus talks, he says that his burden is light. All right, it's not a weight on your back. You have the idea of a reflection. You have the idea of the truth of a light. So then something like the idea is a light. The light went off in your head. The old sign about a light bulb going off over somebody's head. It's the cartoon of getting an idea. But then so you have a God of a reflected light. And then that reflected light is the idea of the concern God. And that's why you have the idea of the where the Vatican, the fallen Catholic idea, where they have a telescope where they're observing nothing more than light and light spectrum in the dome sky, but they refer to it as the idea of Lucifer. And that's, they call it that for a specific reason, because they are observing light, and that within that light is ideas. Within that light is of course the study of wavelength. And then and like I say, all these colors have certain feelings. Like if you see the idea of indigo, that purple, you get a different feeling than if you look at the color orange or green.
Right.
Colors have feelings, and if I want to impart a feeling to you or a seriousness, I'm not going to show you a nice, light green tapestry. I'm going to show you an indigo purple, because I want you to not feel comfortable while I'm telling you this. So then, if I'm going to give you a hoax news story, I'm going to show you everything in indigo, so that you feel depressed. And when I say depressed, your emotions get depressed to a state that you're not thinking straight.
Right, and you can absolutely demonstrate that by, say, the use of yellow in fast food places, or any time there's an Ebola or a Zika, it's always that weird electric green. But I'll tell you what, Dave, we're coming up to the top of the hour. It's 30 degrees here, and the wind is whipping. Yeah, I was going to let him come home, but the wind's whipping out there. He's a California boy like me, so of course he seems to like the cold. I don't know what's wrong with the kid.
Yeah.
But anyhow, I'll be back on maybe 10 minutes after the top of the hour, okay?
Okay, for sure. We'll talk to you then.
Perfect.
Bye-bye.